How do you see Africa evolving within this space?
Well, we think there are two big things happening in Africa. We've seen the sudden surge in growth in telecoms, especially in mobile. And I think we're going to now see two big things happening. One, some amount of innovation is going to come out of Africa. Africa has leapfrogged in many ways, several intermediate technological steps. And now with the pervasive deployment of mobile, we're going to start seeing some neat things like mobile money starting to penetrate, bringing the unbanked onto the more formal economy. At the same time, in some of the highly developed markets where penetration levels have reached 100% or are reaching 100%, we're going to start seeing explosive growth in data, whether that be media-oriented data, information-oriented data. We're already seeing it in markets like South Africa, where the adoption of smartphone technology, for example, is putting a significant amount of traffic on the networks.
Serge, is Africa still the land of opportunity for telecoms operators? Of course, we've seen a lot of interest in this sector over the past few years. We've had Bharti Airtel looking at the sector. We've had Vodafone very interested in Africa. Is the opportunity still there?
Definitely, definitely. And you know that Africa is for the time being, the continent with the highest growth of telecom in the world. And we're all expecting that this will continue. And therefore, coming from mature market and coming from other developing countries also, operators are trying to have footprint in Africa. So we're saying that for the past, we'll continue to see that in the future.
Nadia, the technology, is it in place to enable the growth that we are seeing?
Absolutely, and we're seeing that as the catalyst to even enable industries like healthcare and education within the African markets. Obviously, it's bridging a gap in terms of data availability and bandwidth limitations there, which is definitely a core focus, I think, for this industry at this time.
You mentioned data, Jonathan. I mean, where is the growth at this moment? Because, of course, we know South Africa is a more mature market, but there are markets out there where penetration is still very low. Is data what everyone's focusing on at the moment, or are people just out there trying to gather customers at this stage?
Well, we have a little of both going on. Gathering customers is sort of the first challenge in rapidly developing or emerging markets. But once you have a level of customer penetration, the challenge that operators have is to add value. So value over and above purely voice services. And I think they're going to start seeing that happen in the data arena. What's interesting about data, though, is it's both an opportunity and a challenge. Data tends to put a tremendous amount of traffic on the network, and it puts sort of continuous traffic on the network, so it requires a significant amount of capital to support rapid data growth. The opportunity, on the other hand, is, and we've seen this in global markets, is once data adoption reaches a certain level, ARPUs, which have typically been going down, so revenues per user that have been typically going down, start to turn back up. So you have this dichotomy of data putting amount of risk and load on the network, but data also turns the tide around for operators by increasing the revenue they can make off customers.
Serge, do we have the capacity for all this data? I know we have all sorts of cables being laid offshore, so CCOM and what have you. Is the capacity there to support the demand for data at this stage?
The point is that capacity is not enough in Africa, and definitively the landing of cables. You know that a lot of operators, a lot of countries also are investing in building submarine cables to increase the broadband capacity in Africa. And basically, it's not enough. But so it's a future of investment, and even should it be satellite, should it be cable, this is completely required so that it can meet the data exposure in Africa.
And of course, the future of investment, but at the same time, we also have ICASA hammering down on cell phone companies, trying to get them to cut costs, yet those cell phone companies have to invest in this infrastructure. Are they investing enough in infrastructure, in your view, Nadia?
Absolutely, but they're also looking at ways of increasing the efficiencies and the supply chain within the telecommunications sector, where basically they have to move to smarter ways of doing things and investing in Africa, especially looking at things like managed services, where they can outsource the cost-intensive investment in IT and infrastructure to help them enable and increase profitability in the sector at this stage.
What are margins looking like for operators in Africa at this stage? Because I think that was one thing that Bharti was looking at, particularly last year when it was interested in tying up with MTN, because margins in India were nothing compared to the margins you get here in Africa. Is that still the case?
Well, margins are a unique challenge in telecoms. There is a tendency, as penetration increases, that both margins and revenue per typical user start to drop. The challenge that the operators have is obviously to get into high margin markets, but at the same time to maintain those margins by offering richer and richer services. I think there has been some margin erosion in telecommunications, not just in Africa, but around the world. But at the same time, operators have captured some of that value by being efficient around their costs, efficient around sharing infrastructure. They have given up on building their own networks in certain situations. They are sharing networks with others, given up on building their own systems. They are outsourcing some of those. So they're managing this as effectively as possible. But margin erosion is a challenge, especially as you start to serve a broader and more rural population.
I think particularly in East Africa there's a big challenge there. In Kenya there's a bit of a price war going on at the moment. Serge, how does it look in West Africa? Are you seeing the same sort of price wars in West Africa? I think you're based in Abidjan, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. We are the same. You see the same situation in Western Africa. So should it be Francophone West Africa or even in Nigeria? You know, a lot of struggle on prices. And like Jonathan was saying, the key issue for the coming month and years will be to control the cost. Control the cost, control the capex, to find another, way of doing the business and providing the service and covering the countries also. So, and this is a big challenge in Africa because, we have some issues concerning, for instance, power availability, security system, and the way people are transported. So we have increasing talent availability also. So on the way, you need to maintain your cost. You are in a situation where companies are struggling with wild prices, definitively.
Competition, how's that helping, particularly here in South Africa where we've now had Telkom coming in with ATA, and so stepping up and also I think sharing infrastructure as Jonathan was saying, so they are going to be piggybacking off some of the MTN's infrastructure as far as I know. How's that helping competition in our sector?
I think it's actually driving a lot of competitive differentiators from each of these players where they're looking at providing that cutting edge in terms of the offerings as well as the value to the end consumer. So in that they are looking at things like additional data streams that they can provide from an either education point of view or entertainment and media where they're incorporating additional revenue streams to obviously up probability and also look at an increasing return on investment for investors at this stage.
So is that really where mobile operators in South Africa have to look at this stage to get those additional streams?
Absolutely. You're going to have a certain number of people using cell phones on a day-to-day basis, but there's so many commercial applications that they can use from a technology point of view. New trends that we've seen is using mobile devices to actually incorporate in healthcare scenarios, in education, providing that to rural areas where they probably wouldn't have technology or the availability of resources, and even in terms of operations where you might be dealing with scenarios where your operators are sitting in one industry and you've got offshore workers. The mobility technology at this stage is actually enabling a lot of those bridges to be gapped.
Jonathan, you talked about mobile payments right at the beginning, and that is something that's starting to take off, it looks like. I mean, is Africa a leader in mobile payments? Is it unique to Africa?
It's not necessarily unique to Africa, but in some ways Africa is a leader in mobile payments. And I think the demographics and the history of sort of where Africa started has made that even more pervasive here. So what you're really looking at is that mobile phones reach a lot more people than banks do, probably by a factor of 4 or 5. However, the need for basic banking services is at everyone's level. Layer on top of that the fact that through mobile devices and through electronic or mobile payments, you can offer the same level of services that banks can offer, but at a much lower cost. It makes it a very real service for a much larger or broader demographic.
But it still requires lots of investments in infrastructure, doesn't it?
It does require a certain amount of investment in infrastructure, but the base infrastructure, which is the technology and the data delivery capability and the networks, are already in place. And that's sort of the beauty of mobile. Mobile has gotten out there as a voice capability for the most part. People trying to communicate. Africa saw a sort of a cultural leapfrog going from having no telecom services to a very large percentage of the population in a period of less than 10 years having a mobile device. Now it's a question of what gets layered on top, whether that's mobile money, which we're seeing take off recently and quite well and working very effectively, and the ability for people to trust the system, to trust their money onto the system, education services that we talked about, health services. So we're going to start seeing some real value add come out of the mobile networks, and mobile money is a great example of how real it can become and how fast it can get into the system.
So just finally, what sorts of risks do you see, though, for operators, telecoms operators in Africa at this stage? What are the risks out there for them?
I think the first level of risk is the same in all of the market, is losing the clients. Because of the level of competition we have in Africa, they struggle to get the clients to key. Second is, of course...
Which is good for pricing.
Exactly, because of the price war. And also maintaining the cost, because like I was telling you, the cost structure in Africa is quite different about what we see in other markets, even developing markets. You have to maintain the clients, you have to control the cost, and also, like Jonathan was saying, try to maintain the revenue per user, because without any money coming in the system, it's going to be sustainable. So I think, to make a summary, these three levels of risk are the key zones, definitively.